Okay, let's talk about Akıl. One scholar calls it the greatest power we've been given.
And he's not kidding. I mean, the title of his book makes this incredibly bold claim.
To help us get it, he uses this really cool metaphor. Imagine reason is like a honeycomb.
So what is Akıl, really? If we look at its root words, we find three key ideas.
First up, it's a connector. It's what forges that bond with God, nature, and even ourselves. Next, it's a protector. It's the power that helps you stop those negative impulses from your ego.
And finally, it's an organizer. You know, like a comb, it brings order to all that mental chaos.
Okay, that's what it is. But how does it actually work? The Quran gives it some key jobs. Well, its main job is to understand, and it follows this really clear three-step process. And this is where it gets serious. The Quran directly connects this process to our final destiny. But it's not just about the big picture. Reason also shapes our daily character, our edep. And you can really see the difference. Just look at the contrast in someone's actions. So here's the big takeaway. Morality isn't just a feeling. It's a direct product of intellect. And you know what? We're only just scratching the surface here. This concept goes way deeper. In fact, the author points out that the Quran actually mentions 7 different types of Akıl. So if reason really is our greatest power, it makes you wonder, how are you using yours?
Today, we're diving into a massive idea, a concept described as nothing less than the single greatest power God ever created, reason itself. Let's get right into it. Right from the get-go, the author of our source material, Professor Baraktar Barakli, wants us to know this is serious stuff. He's telling us straight up what we're about to explore is a big deal. I mean, that's a huge claim, right? So let me just ask you, what if the most powerful tool in the entire universe wasn't some hidden treasure you had to search for, but was actually something that's been inside your head all along? So just to be clear, what we're doing here is neutrally unpacking the key ideas from Professor Barakli's 2024 book. We're going to explore his perspective on the Islamic theological concept of reason, which is known as Akıl. Okay, so where does the author even start with this massive topic? Well, probably not where you'd expect. He doesn't begin with thinking. Instead, he goes right to the root of the word itself. Let's look at his first core idea, reason as a bond. And this is fascinating. The original Arabic root of the word akıl isn't about intellect or logic. It literally means a bond, a tie, something like a rope that you use to connect one thing to another. So how does this bond thing work? Well, according to the author, our reason operates on 3 really crucial levels. First, and he says this is the most important one, it creates a bond between us and God. Second, it bonds different concepts together, which is how we make sense of the world. And third, it helps us bond with ourselves through self-reflection. This quote right here really shows you how high the stakes are for him. He argues that this divine connection is the primary job of reason. So, to get in the way of that, he calls that the greatest injustice of all. Now for the second core meaning, if the first job of reason is to connect, the author argues its second job is to protect. This brings us to the idea of reason as a shield. The key word the author uses here is a Turkish verb durdurmak. It just means to stop, to halt, to put on the brakes. He's saying that our reason is our internal braking system. So picture this. The author describes this constant internal battle. On one side, you've got these destructive impulses coming from the ego, the nefs, and from temptation or shaitan. And on the other side, you have akıl, your reason, stepping in and saying, nope, stop right there. That's what creates what we call willpower. And here's the crucial link he makes. This stopping power isn't just about everyday self-control. For the author, this is the absolute foundation of the major theological concept of taqwa, that state of being conscious of God and actively protecting yourself from doing wrong. Okay, so we've covered the meanings of akıl. It's a bond and it's a shield. But what's its purpose? What is reason actually supposed to do according to the Quran? The book lays out a few core jobs based on scripture. And akıl is never just passive. It's supposed to be actively understanding, actively thinking, figuring out what the truth is and speaking it, and even forming the very foundation of good manners and respect. And this leads to a really key argument he makes. Revelation, like the Quran, isn't meant to replace our reason. It's the opposite. He says the Quran's message is aimed directly at our reason.
It's designed to wake it up, to engage it, and to activate its full potential.
So we have this incredibly powerful tool inside of us, but what happens if we just let it sit there, if we ignore it? Well, this final section covers the author's very stark analysis of what he calls the price of neglect.
To show the ultimate consequences, the author brings in this incredibly powerful verse from the Quran. It describes this deep, painful regret from people in hellfire who realized their fate was sealed the moment they failed to listen and, just think.
So at the end of the day, he's presenting a really clear choice with two totally different destinations. Using your Akıl, he says, leads you down a path of truth, wisdom, and eventually paradise. But neglecting it, that path leads to chaos, injustice, ruin, and hellfire.
And just in case the point wasn't sharp enough, the author underscores it with another verse. And this one is pretty blunt. It describes those who refuse to use their reason as deaf and dumb and calls them the worst of living creatures in God's sight.
And that pretty much wraps up our brief look at this book. But get this, we've only scratched the surface. The author actually identifies at least 6 other distinct types of reason in the Quran. So it kind of leaves you with this big question, right? What else could these other sides of our intellect possibly reveal about the true nature of this incredible power we all have?
Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today with a bit of a weird visualization.
Okay, I'm ready.
I want you to imagine a Swiss Army knife. But instead of, a corkscrew or a tiny pair of scissors, this tool has a rope, a hair comb, a high-voltage electrical shield, and a grapevine.
That is a very specific and slightly chaotic mental image.
It is. But what if I told you that this weird toolkit is actually the most accurate description of the human intellect?
Okay, you've got my attention.
And I don't mean intellect in the sense of being good at Sudoku or having a high IQ. I mean the actual mechanism of thinking that makes you human.
We are definitely going off the beaten path today.
We are. We are looking at a fascinating, dense, and frankly provocative text by Professor Dr. Bayraktar Bayraklan.
Mm-hmm.
The book is titled Allah Ziyaratu en Büyükus, AKIL, which translates to the greatest power created by God, intellect.
Right.
And right off the bat, I have to ask, is this just another one of those books that tells me if I think positive thoughts, I'll get a promotion?
Not even close. If you're looking for the secret, this isn't it. Bayraklan's doing something much more radical here.
Okay.
He's taking the concept of reason, the Arabic word is akil, which we usually treat as a secular biological function like digestion or something.
Yes, it's just the thing your brain does?
Exactly. And he's reframing it as a spiritual entity. He's arguing that the intellect is effectively an internal revelation.
Internal revelation. That's a heavy phrase. Usually when we talk about revelation, we're talking about prophets, holy books, lightning on the mountain, external stuff.
Precisely. And that's the tension the book navigates. Bayraklan argues that God provided 2 forms of guidance. One is external, the Quran, scriptures.
The stuff you read.
The stuff you read. But the other is internal, planted right inside the casing of every human being. He calls the intellect the greatest power because without it, that external revelation is just it's just ink on paper.
So you can't even access the divine without this internal tool.
That's his whole premise. You literally cannot.
So if I'm understanding this, he's saying that thinking like critical thinking, logic, reasoning is actually a form of worship.
He goes further. He implies that not thinking is a form of spiritual suicide.
Wow.
He suggests that what we call reason is actually a moral compass and a biological spiritual immunity system all wrapped into one.
And he breaks this down using word origins, which is what really hooked me.
The etymology is fascinating.
I'm a sucker for it. It turns out the word AKIL doesn't mean brain.
No, it doesn't. And this is where we have to start. Part 1 of our diet is really about defining what this tool actually is. Because in the modern world, we think of the mind as a computer. Input data, process, output, answer.
Right, it's a calculator.
But Bayraklan goes back to the Arabic root of akil, which connects to the idea of a bond. To tie something.
To tie, like with a rope, a knot.
Like a tether. Yeah, exactly. Think about what a bond does. It connects 2 separate entities.
Okay.
The author argues that the primary function of the intellect isn't just to calculate, it's to knit the universe together. It creates a vertical bond.
Vertical meaning?
Connecting the human to the divine. And a horizontal bond connecting us to nature and to each other.
That's so interesting because usually we associate intellectualism with detachment. the ivory tower professor who is totally disconnected from the real world.
Right, the cold analyst.
But he's saying true intellect is the ultimate connection.
That's the argument. If you are disconnected, if you feel isolated, alienated from nature, or cut off from a sense of purpose, it's not a chemical imbalance in the universe. It's a failure of the AKIL to do its job as a connector.
So it's a tool that's just rusting in the toolbox.
It is. And he references the Quranic command to hold fast to the rope of Allah.
I've heard that before. Usually people interpret the rope as the religion itself or the Quran, the scripture.
Akıl says yes, but there are actually two ropes.
Oh, okay.
There is the rope of the text, the external revelation, and the rope of the intellect, the internal one. And you need both to climb. You can't just use one arm.
So you can't just hold the religious rope and expect to be saved. You can't just have blind faith.
Not according to this text. He argues that if you let go of the rope of intellect, maybe because you want to blindly follow a charismatic leader, or you're just too lazy to think for yourself.
Which happens a lot.
It happens all the time. He says you have severed your connection to the divine. And if that bond is severed, the human being effectively dies.
Spiritually dies, he means.
Spiritually. You might be biologically alive, eating, sleeping, scrolling through social media, but spiritually you are a corpse because the connection line is dead.
That is a terrifying thought. Walking dead, but instead of eating brains, we just have unused ones.
It's a bleak picture.
But there's another definition he uses that I found really practical. He calls AKIL a restrainer. The Turkish word is engel.
Yes, this is the defensive function.
Yeah.
If the bond is the rope that pulls you up, the restrainer is the brake that stops you from sliding down.
He uses this great analogy of an insulator, like the rubber coating on a copper wire.
It's a perfect metaphor for the modern age, isn't it? We are constantly bombarded by impulses. The author calls these the nefs, the lower self, the ego, and satanic whispers. Now, you can interpret that theologically or psychologically, doesn't matter, but we all know that feeling of a sudden destructive impulse.
Oh, yeah. I should scream at this person. I should cheat on this. I should buy this thing I absolutely can't afford.
That's the high voltage. That impulse is raw, dangerous electricity. Akıl argues that the intellect acts as the insulator.
The rubber coating.
The rubber coating. If your AKIL is active and working, that electricity flows safely. It can power your life without burning the house down. But if the insulation is worn thin, if you stop thinking critically and just react, you get shocked.
You get electrocuted by your own ego.
And that electrocution looks like addiction, it looks like rage, it looks like social destruction. The intellect is the only thing standing between you and that raw current.
He brings in a very old school desert metaphor to explain this, which I actually found really funny but also super accurate. The camel.
The hobbled camel.
Yeah. Can you explain this for people who don't, own livestock?
So, in the desert tradition, a camel is your most valuable asset, right?
Right.
But it's also willful. It will wander off. It will trample your tent if you're not careful.
Right.
So you use a rope to hobble its knee. You tie it so it can't run away, but it can still move around slowly or stay put. The author says your nefs, your impulsive animalistic side, is that camel.
It's big, it's powerful, and it can be really stupid.
And it will run away with your life if you let it. The AKIL is the rope. You have to tie the knee of your ego.
That distinction is so key. He isn't saying kill the camel.
No.
You need the camel to travel. You need your drives and desires, but they have to be restrained.
They have to be managed by intellect.
Exactly.
And this leads to his reinterpretation of a really famous ritual, the Hajj ritual of the stoning of the devil.
Okay, yeah.
Now, we've all seen images of millions of pilgrims throwing stones at these pillars in Mecca. It's a ritual reenactment. But Akıl says, stop looking at the physical stones.
He says the physical stones don't really matter.
He argues that the physical ritual is symbolic of an internal reality. He says the real stoning happens inside your head every single day.
So what's the stone then?
The intellect is the arm. The stones are logic, questioning, and faith. When a destructive thought enters your mind, I should commit this injustice, or I should spread this lie, and you use your logic to say, no, that is wrong because of X, Y, and Z, you have just stoned the devil.
I love that. It turns a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage into like a Tuesday afternoon activity at your desk.
It makes the intellect a weapon, a tool for spiritual warfare. It's active. It's not a passive thing that just sits there.
Speaking of active, let's move to part 2.
Yeah.
Because the author moves away from just these definitions and starts talking about what the active intellect actually does in society.
Right, the practical application.
And he uses 3 metaphors that are, well, they're poetic, but they're also really sharp social commentary. The first one is the comb. The Turkish word is teramak.
The comb. This is my favorite metaphor for, like, governance and sociology. Imagine waking up with severe bedhead. Your hair is matted, tangled, full of knots.
That is me every single morning.
Yeah.
No imagination required.
Now imagine a whole society that looks like that. Conflicting laws, bureaucracy that doesn't make any sense, corruption, social arguments that go nowhere, confusing traditions.
This is a giant knot.
It's a giant knot. The author calls this a mess. He says the function of AKIL is to be the comb. It moves through the mess and detangles it. It separates the strands.
So a society that feels chaotic and unjust is a society that has basically stopped combing its hair.
It's a society that has stopped thinking. Think about how satisfying it is to patiently untangle a knot. That is what the intellect does. It categorizes, it prioritizes, and it straightens out the hair of the community.
And if you don't, if you just pull on it.
What happens when you pull on a knot without combing it? You tear the hair out. It's painful. Akil implies that violence in society often happens because we try to force things rather than untangle them with intellect.
That flows right into the second metaphor, which is about growth. The vine, asthma.
Right. So you've combed the hair, now you need to grow the fruit. The author compares the intellect to the water and nutrients traveling through a grapevine.
Okay.
The vine itself is just the structure. Maybe that's the human body or the society. But the AKIL is the life force that travels through it to produce the grape.
And the grape is civilization.
Culture.
Yes. Art, science, architecture, just laws, poetry. These are the sweet fruits of a society that has active intellect flowing through it. But he warns about the reverse.
What happens if the water stops flowing?
If the intellect dries up, the vine doesn't just sit there. It produces karuk.
Karuk, that's sour, unripe grapes.
Sour, hard, completely inedible grapes.
Right.
Or the vine just withers and dies. And he makes a really interesting kind of provocative comparison to evolution here. He flips Darwin on his head.
Yeah, the reverse evolution idea?
Yeah.
That was wild. He says, look, you can argue about biology all day long. But spiritually, if humans abandon intellect, they don't stay human. They devolve. They become animals in the sense that they live only by instinct and reaction.
So a society without intellect produces sour, culture-toxic media, shallow art, injustice.
It's the difference between a thriving vineyard and a patch of weeds.
And that leads to the third, probably the most complex metaphor in this section. Blood money. Candieti.
Yeah, this one takes a minute to unpack.
I have to admit, I had to read this section twice. Blood money sounds so archaic, like something out of medieval clan war.
It is archaic, but the concept behind it is universal. In tribal law, if you killed someone or caused a serious harm, you couldn't just say sorry, it wouldn't work.
No.
You had to pay a heavy price blood money to the victim's family to balance the scales and, most importantly, stop the cycle of revenge.
Okay, so how on earth does the intellect pay blood money?
So the author applies this to the concept of taba, or repentance. He argues that when we commit a sin, and he focuses specifically on inkar, which is denial, or shirk, which is idolatry,
Okay.
we are effectively spilling the blood of our own faith. We've committed a crime against our own soul.
And you can't just say, oops, you've created a debt.
Oops, doesn't pay the debt. Akıl argues that the only currency valuable enough to pay this spiritual debt is the intellect.
How so? I don't get that.
Because true repentance isn't just an emotional act. It's not just feeling bad. It is a cognitive act.
An intellectual process.
Yes, it requires you to stop, look at the wreckage you caused, analyze why you did it, understand the flaw in your original thinking, and then consciously reconstruct your worldview. That mental labor is the gold that pays the blood money.
That's profound. It takes repentance away from just being an emotional, I feel bad moment.
Yeah.
And turns it into an intellectual, I understand what I broke and how to fix it moment.
Exactly. Without AKIL, you can't truly repent because you don't even know what you destroyed. You're just crying without changing. The intellect pays the ransom to restore peace between the human and the divine.
He wraps up this section with one more function, which is a bit more defensive.
Yeah.
He calls it the tripwire.
Or the detector. Yeah.
And this was a personal story from his childhood, right?
It was. His mother taught him about grazing animals. She pointed out that sheep and cows have an instinct to smell poisonous grass and just spit it out. They don't eat the hemlock.
They have a biological yuck detector.
Right. And Akıl asks a really simple question. If a sheep has a mechanism to avoid physical poison, did God leave humans defenseless against poisonous ideas?
And the answer is obviously no. He couldn't have.
The answer is the intellect. The AKIL is designed to smell toxic ideologies, scams, dangerous theological traps, and, modern conspiracy theories. It's supposed to trip up these ideas before they get into your heart.
So if I'm scrolling online and I see some rage bait article and I just swallow it whole without checking if it's true,
Then your spiritual immune system is compromised. You have lost the ability to smell the poison. You are, in his words, effectively grazing on toxic grass.
which segues perfectly into the terrifying part of the book. Part 3, the consequences. What happens when we eat the poison? What happens when we turn the intellect off?
We enter the black hole. He calls it the Kara Delic.
He uses that specific astrophysics term.
He does. He compares denial in Kar to a black hole in the heart. And the physics analogy holds up surprisingly well. A black hole is a gravity well so strong it swallows light.
Nothing escapes.
Nothing. Bayraklan argues that when you shut down your intellect, you create a vacuum in your soul. And that vacuum doesn't just sit empty, it starts swallowing things. It swallows mercy, it swallows love, it swallows truth.
It collapses in on itself.
It does. And this leads to his interpretation of a Quranic verse in Surah Tekfir, where the stars recede or hide themselves. He sees this as a metaphor for the lights of the soul going out one by one.
That's dark.
It is. But the most controversial part of this section, and the one that I think challenges religious listeners the most, is his description of hell.
Yeah, let's go there. Because usually we are told that hell is for bad people, murderers, thieves, tyrants.
Yeah.
But he suggests hell is for people who just didn't think.
It sounds incredibly harsh, doesn't it?
It sounds incredibly harsh. I mean, what about simple people? What about people who just aren't, book smart? Are they doomed?
No, and that's a crucial distinction he makes. He's not talking about IQ. He's not talking about the ability to solve a quadratic equation.
Okay.
He's talking about the will to use the tool you were given, whatever its capacity. He quotes Surah Mulk, verse 10. This is a scene at the gates of hell. The people there are asked, what went wrong? How did you end up here?
And what do they say?
They don't say, we didn't pray enough or we didn't fast enough. They say, if only we had listened or used our intellect, AKIL, we wouldn't be here.
Wow. So the admission of guilt is an admission of mindlessness.
It implies that the gate to hell is unlocked by the abandonment of reason. Bayraklan even suggests, poetically, that there could be a sign over hell's gate reading, those who use their intellect do not enter.
So blind faith isn't actually a virtue in this framework.
It's the opposite. It's a liability. He calls the silencing of the intellect zulm. The word means cruelty or oppression.
And who are we being cruel to?
To ourselves. He imagines the intellect as a bird trapped in a cage inside your chest. It wants to sing the truth. It wants to fly. But we cage it.
And why do we cage it?
For comfort. For tradition. Because of political pressure. Don't ask questions. Just do as you're told. Bayraklan says that silencing that bird, whether it's a government censoring free speech or just a person lying to themselves, is the ultimate act of oppression.
And he calls the societal result social leukemia.
A cancer of the social blood. When a society runs on ego and blind impulse instead of intellect, it eats itself alive. It loses its immunity to corruption and violence.
Okay, we've established that the intellect is the hero of the story. But the book gets more granular, which I found fascinating. It turns out intellect isn't just one thing. It has flavors.
Yeah.
Or layers.
Yeah, different types.
This is part 4 and 5 of our dive. Let's start with lub.
Lub. It's a fun word to say. Lub.
It sounds a bit like lub-dub, like a heartbeat.
That's actually a happy accident because lub is deeply connected to the heart and the core of things. The word literally means the kernel, the core, or the marrow.
Marrow, like inside the bone.
Exactly. If you look at a walnut, you have the hard outer shell. That's the surface reality. Maybe that's just raw data or just the physical world we see. But you have to break the shell to get to the meat inside. That meat, the essential part, is the lub.
So lub is deep thinking. Seeing past the surface.
It's essential thinking. It's the ability to strip away all the noise and see the absolute core of a matter. But that marrow analogy is the most powerful one he uses. Biologically, what does bone marrow do? It produces blood cells. It creates the body's immune system. Bayraklan argues that lub produces the social blood of a community.
This connects right back to the social leukemia idea.
Right. If your society lacks lub, if people are only ever looking at the surface and never the core of issues, the society stops producing healthy blood. It loses its immunity. But here's the part that really surprised me. He connects lub directly to love and compassion.
Yeah, I circled this part in my notes. Because usually we say head versus heart, Logic is cold, love is warm. They're supposed to be enemies.
Akıl completely smashes that dichotomy. He asks a very simple question. How can you truly love something you don't understand? How can you have mercy if you can't empathize? And what is empathy but a high-level cognitive function?
So, a stupid person can't be truly kind. Is that what he's saying?
I think he'd say a person who has turned off their lub cannot be sustainably kind. They might be nice when it's easy. But true compassion, the kind that stops a war or feeds the hungry, requires the intellect to understand the core of suffering. He argues that cruelty like killing children or ignoring the poor is literally a form of insanity. It's a clinical failure of the mind, a lack of lub.
Cruelty is a cognitive failure.
Yeah.
That's going to stick with me.
It reframes evil as a kind of profound stupidity. Not, haha, you're dumb, but you have lost the faculty that makes you human.
So that's live the core, the marrow, the love. Now let's look at its partner.
Roost.
Roost. This comes from a root meaning to be on the right path or maturity.
I think of this as the adult in the room.
That's a perfect description. If lube is the internal depth, roost is the external competence. It is analytical sharpness. Akıl described the function of roost as performing a blood test.
A blood test? How does that work?
Imagine you go to a doctor. You say, I feel sick. A doctor without roost might just look at you, guess, and give you a painkiller.
Treating the symptom.
Exactly. But a doctor with roost runs a blood test. They analyze the cause, they look at the data, they trace the symptoms back to the source of the disease.
So roost is about cause and effect analysis. It's the judicial mind. This is why roost is essential for law and for politics. A judge without roost can be bribed or swayed by an emotional story. But a judge with roost looks at the facts, analyzes the sequence of events, and delivers a straight, impartial verdict. It is the backbone of justice.
The author uses a specific historical figure to illustrate this, doesn't he? The prophet Abraham.
Yes, Ibrahim, the ultimate iconoclast. The Quran says God gave Abraham his roost even when he was a young man, before he was a prophet. And what did he immediately do with it? He picked a fight with his own culture?
He went and questioned his father. That's a big deal.
A huge deal. He looked at the idols his father was carving and selling. Now, the polite thing to do would have been to stay quiet. The faithful thing in the eyes of his society would have been to worship like everyone else. But Abraham used his roost. He asked a simple analytical question. What are these statues you worship?
And when they gave him the classic answer, it's tradition, he did buy it.
That is the key moment. Roost is the enemy of taqlid, blind imitation. When they said, we found our fathers doing this, Abraham basically said, so what? Your fathers were wrong. That takes incredible intellectual courage. Roost is the filter that separates truth from tradition.
I like that idea of it being a filter. There's a verse referenced, I think it's from Tura Zoomer, about listening to everything.
Yes. Those who listen to all words but follow the best of them. This is so important for the information age we live in. Some people think being pious or moral means hiding from the world. Don't read those books. Don't listen to those people.
The bubble approach. Build a safe space.
But Roost says, no, do the opposite. Listen to everything. Read the opposing view. Listen to the atheist, the believer, the politician, the rebel. Then use your roost to filter it all. Keep the gold. Throw away the dirt.
It implies a deep intellectual confidence. You don't need to hide if you have a working filter.
You trust your own mind.
This brings us to the final act of the book, Part 6. Intellect, the Quran, and the future. We have all these tools, the rope, the comb, the marrow, the filter. What do we do with them? The author talks about the great synthesis.
He calls for bitshterm, a Turkish word meaning connection or unification. He diagnoses the modern world's illness as separation.
We've separated church and state, sure, but he means something deeper than that.
Much deeper. He means we've separated the mind from the heart. We've put science in one box and faith in another. We've put school over here and mosque or church over there. He argues that this schizophrenia is killing us.
It makes us incomplete people. We leave our brains at the door of the temple, and we leave our hearts at the door of the laboratory.
Exactly. And the cure, he says, is to bring them back together. He redefines education in a really beautiful way. He says true education isn't about memorizing facts to pass a test.
It's not just downloading data into your head.
No. He describes education as adding an eye to the eye, an ear to the ear, and a heart to the heart.
That's a beautiful phrase. What does it mean practically?
It means enhancing your perception. Your biological eye sees a tree. An educated eye, an eye enhanced by AKIL, sees the photosynthesis, the ecosystem, the carbon cycle, and maybe the divine artistry behind it. Education is about upgrading your hardware so you can process the honor contained in the universe.
He mentions that the Quran contains humanity's honor.
He's quoting Surah Anbiya, verse 10, "We have sent down a book in which is your honor." But Bayraklan makes a crucial point. You can own the book, you can put it on the highest shelf in your house, you can cover it in velvet. But if you don't use your AKIL to understand it, you have zero honor.
The honor is locked inside.
It is, and the intellect is the only key. No key, no honor.
So the ultimate vision here is a world where intellect and revelation are married, not divorced.
When AKIL, the intellect, meets the Quran, the revelation, he says they embrace. They are like long-lost friends. And their child, the thing they produce together, is hikmet, which means wisdom.
Not just knowledge, but wisdom.
Solution-based knowledge, the kind the world is starving for.
It's a hopeful place to end, but it's also a really challenging one, because it puts all the responsibility squarely back on us.
It completely removes the excuse of ignorance.
We've covered a lot today. We've gone from the rope that tethers us to existence, to the comb that untangles our messy politics, to the marrow that generates our compassion.
It's a dense system, but it's remarkably coherent.
If the listener takes just one thing away from this deep dive today, what do you think it should be?
For me, it's the redefinition of worship. We tend to think worship is just bowing or chanting or fasting or charity rituals. But Professor Barakla is handing us a different script.
A completely different one.
He's saying to think is to worship. To analyze a problem is to pray. To solve a societal knot is to stone the devil.
And the reverse of that.
To stop thinking is to leave the temple. To reject reason is to reject God's greatest gift.
That brings us back to the bird.
Yeah.
The final image the author leaves us with.
The bird in the cage. He says the intellect is singing inside you right now. It's asking questions. Is this right? Why am I doing this? Is this really true?
And the question for all of us this week is, are you going to open the cage and let it fly? Or are you going to throw a blanket over it because the song is inconvenient or uncomfortable?
Let it fly. It's the only way to reach the sky.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Keep thinking.
And we need to get straight into the structure.
Yes. Let's start with the first section on Akıl.
Right, the list.
The list. I mean, the section is incredibly dense with all these linguistic definitions, but the way they're laid out, it's a bit of a challenge.
It feels like a catalog. Seriously, it's like I walked into a hardware store and someone is just reading the inventory to me. First, ba, which is bond, then durdermak, to restrain, then atmak, to cast.
One after another.
Yeah, and while it's rigorous, I mean, you can't fault the research.
Oh, not at all. The scholarship is there. But for the reader, it just completely fragments their understanding. I'm building a mental model of what bond means, and then boom, here comes a bold header for refuge or sığınak, and I have to, what? Start all over again?
You have to completely reset your mental stage. It's this friction point that forces a hard reset of your imagination every few paragraphs.
Exactly. You're thinking about a bond, and then suddenly you're asked to visualize paying a blood price or diet. The connective tissues, just, it's not there.
And the reader is left wondering, okay, but how do these things actually fit together inside a single human mind?
So the fix here isn't about cutting content. The definitions are crucial.
Right. It's about restructuring how they're introduced. We need to move away from this linear list and towards something more like, I don't know, a solar system model.
A solar system model. Okay, walk me through that.
Well, the manuscript already points to ba, the bond, as a primary definition. So let's make that the sun. It's the master metaphor.
I like that.
And every other definition shouldn't be a separate item on a list. It should be a planet orbiting that sun, defined by its relationship to that central bond.
So instead of just saying definition 2 is restraining, you'd frame it as, because the intellect is a bond to the divine, it therefore acts as a restraint.
Precisely. Think about the narrative power there. If I tell you reason is a bond and then reason is also a restraint, you have two separate facts.
Right, 2 bullet points.
But if I tell you that reason acts as a tether that restrains the ego from wandering off a cliff because it is bonded to something higher, now you have a system. You understand the mechanism.
And you could do the same with the more aggressive definitions too, like atmak, casting stones.
Yes. Right now it's just sitting there, definition, to cast.
It feels aggressive, kind of weirdly disconnected from the idea of a bond.
But if you frame it as the defense of the bond, it all clicks into place.
Why does the intellect cast stones at intrusive thoughts? Why does it trip up its enemies, that Chelmatukup Dishermek idea? It's not random aggression.
It's protecting the connection.
It turns the definitions into a kind of job description. The bond is the mission statement.
And restraining is the internal policy. Casting stones is the security detail.
And diet, the blood price, that's the insurance policy.
Yes, and if the author groups these under thematic headings like the defensive functions of reason or the stabilizing functions, then the reader stops seeing a dictionary.
They start seeing a dynamic machine. It shifts the entire experience from learning vocabulary to understanding how my own mind is supposed to work.
And that internal working of the mind, that actually leads us perfectly into the author's next major concept.
The power source.
The core, the lub.
Now this section on lub, conceptually it might be my favorite part of the whole manuscript.
Mine too. But the execution is, well, it's leaving a lot of potential on the table.
The central metaphor is ilik, or marrow. The text argues that lub is the marrow inside the bone of the intellect.
And then it drops this incredibly potent phrase, toplumsal leucemia, social leukemia.
It's a brilliant phrase. It really stopped me in my tracks. The idea that if the love, this deep intellect, isn't functioning, society itself develops a kind of blood cancer.
But here's the issue. He says it, and then he just moves on. He drops the mic and walks away.
It's stated as a fact rather than explored as a process. We know what biological leukemia is. The marrow produces abnormal cells that crowd out the healthy ones.
But what does that look like in a civilization? The text gets a little too poetic there and loses the analytical thread.
We need to really explore this metaphor. If the author wants this to land with the force it deserves, he needs to get granular.
So if love is the marrow, what's the blood it's producing for society?
I would argue the blood is values. Justice, mercy, ethics, truth. The lubes is what takes the raw nutrients, data, observation, all our sensory input, and synthesizes them into these values that are supposed to circulate through the whole social body.
Okay, so if that's the healthy state, what's the leukemia?
That's what the text needs to spell out. Social leukemia isn't just people being dumb. It's the active production of corrupted values.
I see.
It's when the marrow produces bureaucracy instead of justice, or dogmatic fury instead of ethical clarity. These bad cells get pumped into the economy, into politics, and they starve the healthy organs of society.
That's the missing link. Because right now, the reader has to do all of that heavy lifting. The texture says no lube equals leukemia, but it doesn't show the pathology of the sickness.
If he just added a couple of paragraphs detailing how a society choked by superficial thinking starts, attacking its own body, that section goes from interesting to devastating.
It also makes the other metaphor in that section, the walnut, much more powerful, the shell versus the meat.
The sevisaliology. It's a classic for a reason.
But again, it needs to be weaponized for modern problems. The text describes the shell and the kernel, which is fine. But the real critique should be that we are living in the age of the shell.
We are obsessed with the container.
Exactly. We see it in religion, where the ritual, the shell, is perfect, but the purpose inside, the hikmet, is gone.
And if the author explicitly states that a society without lub chokes on the shell, it validates the whole leukemia argument. You can't survive on shells. You literally starve.
Mechanism. It filters out the waste to get to the nutrient. If you don't have that filter, you end up consuming poison.
And once you have that functioning marrow, that ability to get to the core of things, you develop a new capability. You stop just reacting to the world, and you start judging it correctly.
Which brings us to the third pillar of the manuscript, rushed, maturity.
This section, to me, feels the most, like a Sunday school lesson right now. And I don't mean that as an insult to the content, just the format.
It leans very heavily on the story of Abraham.
Very heavily. It defines rushed as finding the right path and analysis ability. Then it points to the verse where Abraham looks at the idols and asks his people, what are these statues?
It's a great story. Fantastic example. But for a reader trying to improve their own intellect, it just feels like A historical anecdote. Abraham did this one cool thing.
It's descriptive, not prescriptive. It tells us that he had rushd, but it doesn't teach us how to have rushd.
Exactly. The author is sitting on a gold mine, but he needs to reverse engineer the story. He needs to turn Abraham's action into a repeatable cognitive protocol.
A maturity framework?
Yes. Let's actually look at what Abraham did in that story. He didn't just question. That's too vague. He followed a very specific sequence.
Okay.
Step 1 was observation. He looked at the object, the statue, and he stripped away all the cultural baggage. He just saw it as wood and stone.
Then step 2.
Interrogation. He asks, "What is this?" which is an ontological question. And why do you worship it? A teleological one. And then step 3, evaluation. He compares the tradition of the fathers against rational utility. Do these things actually do anything?
And this is what the text is missing. A simple breakdown, a sidebar maybe, that says how to practice rushd today. Because we all have our own idols.
Oh, we have massive idols. Career success, social media fame, political ideologies.
Imagine applying that Abraham protocol to something like career success. Step 1, observe it. What is it, really? It's a title on a website.
Step 2, interrogate it. Why do I worship this? Because my parents did? Because society tells me to?
And step 3, evaluate. Does this actually serve me, or am I serving it?
See? That simple change completely transforms the chapter. Suddenly, rushd isn't just religious maturity. It becomes an essential tool for critical thinking in the 21st century.
The text calls rushd a blood test for society. But you can't just hand someone a blood test kit without the instructions.
The protocol is the instruction manual. It bridges that huge gap between an ancient text and the modern reader's daily life. It answers the so what question.
And if a reader can master that protocol, if they can distill their observations down to the truth, they finally reach the summit of the book's argument.
Hikmet.
Wisdom.
Hikmet.
And this is maybe the trickiest part of the draft for me. The author defines hikmet as damatilmish bilgi, distilled knowledge, which is a fantastic image, like a serum.
The definition is great. The application, that's where it gets a little wobbly.
Because the text jumps from divine wisdom straight to smartphones.
Right. It argues that technology is a form of hikmet because it solves problems. A phone solves the problem of distance, so it's wisdom. A car solves travel, so it's wisdom.
I get what he's trying to do. He wants to show that AKIL produces concrete, real-world results.
But it feels, I don't know, dangerous. It risks sounding like a tech ad. Is my smartphone really wisdom? I mean, I have one, and it makes me significantly less wise for about 3 hours every day.
That is the modern paradox, and the text just kind of ignores it. If hikmet is truly distilled knowledge, then a lot of our technology is the exact opposite. It's a fire hose of raw, unfiltered data.
Undistilled information, sewage even.
Right. So the argument needs refinement. Technology is only hikmet if it retains that distilled quality. If it efficiently removes human suffering or solves a problem without creating a worse one in its place.
The author needs to lean much harder on that serum metaphor he introduced earlier. He says hikmet is like a medicine that's been purified of toxins so it doesn't kill the patient.
That's the key right there. Apply that to the information age. We are drowning in knowledge, but so much of it is toxic because it hasn't been distilled. The entire function of AKIL is to take this ocean of data and boil it down.
So the critique isn't technology is bad. It's don't just say technology equals wisdom. Say solution-oriented knowledge equals wisdom.
A phone is just plastic and glass. The hikmet is the intent to connect two people. But if that exact same device creates isolation and distraction, it becomes anti-hikmet.
That nuance is absolutely vital. Otherwise, the reader looks at their phone, sees a funny cat video, and thinks, is this what divine wisdom is? It breaks the whole spell of the argument.
It also lets him draw a much more powerful parallel. Spiritual technology, like revelation, solves the moral distance between humanity and God.
While physical technology solves the physical distance between people. Both can be hikmet, but only when they solve the specific problem they were designed for, cleanly.
And that brings the entire book full circle. It unifies everything. The bond connects us, the marrow filters our values, the protocol clarifies our path.
And wisdom applies the cure. It becomes a complete ecosystem of the mind.
So, let's just recap the action items. This is a very strong draft, but to make it a definitive text, we see 4 key structural shifts.
First, kill the listicle. Don't just catalog the definitions of Akıl. Group them. Use the bond as the sun and make the other definitions orbit it. Show us the system, not just the parts.
Second, you have to flesh out that social leukemia metaphor for lube. It's too powerful to leave as a one-liner. Explain the mechanism. Show us how bad marrow creates bad blood, and map that on to social corruption.
Third, turn Abraham into a framework. Move beyond just telling the story of Rushd. Give the reader that 3-step protocol so they can start dismantling their own modern idols. Make it actionable.
And finally, fix the wisdom versus technology argument. Don't just equate gadgets with hikmet. Define it as the distillation of knowledge to solve suffering, and tackle the paradox of the information age head-on.
If the author can make those changes, this manuscript stops being an etymological dictionary.
It becomes a manual for constructing a powerful mind, which is exactly what the title promises. Professor Bayrakli has done the incredibly hard excavation work. Now it's just about refining the architecture.
I would love to see the next draft. The potential here is just massive.
To our listener, thank you so much for submitting a Lazirati Nbuyukich, AKIL. We really hope this critique helps you polish this into the gem it can be. As always, the door's open. Once you've reworked these sections, send it back our way. We want to see this cross the finish line.
Absolutely. Get to work. We'll be here.
That's it for this edition of The Critique. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are dissecting a text that claims we have, well, fundamentally misunderstood the most powerful tool we possess, our minds. We're analyzing Akıl's greatest created power, AKIL, by Professor Dr. Bayrakli, released in 2024. The central premise here, it challenges everything the modern world tells you about intelligence. It argues that reason, or Akıl, is not a data processor. It is not a calculator in your skull. It is a cosmic tether, a literal bond designed to connect the human spirit to the divine.
It is a bold claim. I mean, it's effectively telling us that if we aren't religious, we aren't actually thinking. The text constructs a definition of reason so specific that it creates a kind of closed loop. To be rational is to believe, and to disbelieve is by definition a malfunction of the mind. So while I admire the architectural beauty of Dr. Bayrakli's framework, we have to ask, is this a genuine investigation into human psychology? Or is it, theology masquerading as cognitive science?
I think you're conflating theology with teleology, the study of purpose. Bayrakli isn't masquerading, he's stripping away the modern sterile coating we've put on the mind to reveal its original function. The book opens with a linguistic demolition of our current definitions. He takes the word akal. In Arabic, it comes from the root ba, which means, it means bond or tie.
Right, the etymological argument.
But it's not just wordplay, it's the structural thesis. Bayrakli argues that just as an umbilical cord connects a fetus to its source of life, Akıl is the spiritual umbilical cord connecting man to God. He references the Quranic verse Ali Imran 103, hold fast to the rope of Allah. The text posits that reason is that rope. I mean, if you sever an umbilical cord, the fetus doesn't just live differently, it dies. The argument is that secular reason is a severed cord. It might look like it's functioning, the heart is beating, the neurons are firing, but the entity is spiritually necrotic, it's dying.
That is a terrifying metaphor and, to be honest, a bit exclusionary. Let's look at the logical fallout of that statement. The text explicitly says, denial is the non-operation of reason. It suggests that atheism, skepticism, or even agnosticism aren't intellectual positions reached by analyzing evidence. No, they are treated as blockages. The author compares those who don't use this bond to animals, referencing the deaf, dumb, and blind. My issue is that this turns intelligence into a moral compliance test. If I use my intellect to solve a complex physics problem, but I don't pray, am I dumb, according to this text?
You're focusing on the compliance, but missing the biology of his argument. Bayrakli frames this as a natural instinct, not a rule book. There is a key anecdote in the book that clarifies this.
The author recalls his childhood in the village. He asked his mother why the sheep and cows wouldn't eat certain lush green grass. His mother explained that the animals have an instinct, a natural sensor, to smell the poison in the weeds. If they eat it, they spit it out.
I remember that section. He equates Akıl to that survival instinct.
Exactly. Reason is the human equivalent of that instinct. It is a seed planted by God. When a healthy reason encounters a poisonous idea, like the denial of a creator or the oppression of an orphan, it should biologically reject it. It shouldn't need a lecture. It should feel the nausea. If you eat the poison of denial, it's not because you are a rebel. It's because your taster is broken. It's a malfunction of your primary survival tool.
But that biological determinism falls apart when you look at reality. If reason is a seed programmed by God to find him, why is the failure rate so high? Why is the human species so incredibly prone to, well, eating the weeds? If I'm a cow, I don't eat the poison, but humans, supposedly the only creatures with this divine bond, eat poison constantly. We wage wars, we destroy our environment, we embrace nihilism. The text blames the nefs, the ego, but that feels like a convenient escape hatch.
It's not an escape hatch, it's the variable in the equation. The cow doesn't have a complex nefs fighting for control. We do. The text introduces the concept of reason as an insulator, Yelit. Think of your soul as a wire carrying a current. The nefs and Satan are trying to inject static or high voltage shocks of evil into that wire. Akıl is the insulation material. It wraps around the soul to prevent those external shocks from frying the system. When we see humans eating the poison, we are seeing the insulation failing. The ego has chewed through the wire.
I actually like the engineering metaphor of the insulator. It frames reason not as a sword, but as a shield. However, the text also says reason is a weapon. It talks about stoning the devil.
Yes, a proactive defense.
Baer luckily interprets the Hajj ritual of stoning the devil as a symbolic representation of what our mind should be doing every second. Reason is a projectile. It's supposed to attack falsehoods. But again, this implies that the target, the devil, is always obvious. My critique is that in the real world, moral choices are rarely as clear as poisonous grass versus healthy grass. Sometimes the poison looks exactly like the cure. Does the text offer a way for Akıl to navigate ambiguity, or does it just assume the truth is self-evident?
It handles ambiguity by breaking reason down into layers. This is where we get into the really sticky concepts of the book. We aren't just talking about IQ here. We are talking about lub.
Lub. The text defines this as the core or the marrow.
Correct. And this is the most critical distinction in the book for me. Akıl might be the general faculty, but lub is the deep, essential processing power. The text uses a medical analogy that I think is brilliant. Just as bone marrow produces blood for the body, lub produces social blood.
Social blood, and the lack of it leads to social leukemia.
Precisely. This is the diagnosis for modern civilization. The text argues that a society can be technologically advanced, it can have high IQ, great infrastructure, massive wealth, but if it lacks lub, it stops producing the values that keep it alive: justice, compassion, mercy. It develops social leukemia. The society looks alive on the outside, the skyscrapers are shiny, but inside the blood is white. It has no immunity to injustice. It cannot clot when it is cut. It bleeds out spiritually.
It is a powerful diagnosis, I'll grant you that. Social leukemia perfectly captures that sense of malaise in modern developed nations, the feeling that despite our wealth, the social fabric is brittle. But here is my pushback. The text claims lub, this marrow, is exclusively the property of the believer. It says lub is what cracks the shell to get to the kernel. But can a secular philosopher have lub? Can a secular humanist produce social blood? We see secular societies with very strong social safety nets, low crime, and high trust. According to Akıl, these societies should be dead or dying of leukemia, but they aren't.
The author would argue you were looking at the shell of those societies, not the marrow. A social safety net is a policy. It's not necessarily social blood. Lib requires internalizing the truth, not just legislating it.
The text explicitly links lib to the veins of compassion and mercy in the human heart. If your justice system is based on cold calculation, we shouldn't kill because it reduces GDP, that's not lib. That's dry logic. Eventually, that logic fails when it becomes profitable to kill. Lib is the failsafe. It's the moral intuition that says this is wrong even when the math says this is profitable.
So you're saying lib is the difference between a transaction and a conviction?
Exactly. And to have that conviction, the text argues you need to recognize the source of that conviction. You cannot have divine compassion without the divine.
That brings us to the mechanism of how this marrow interacts with the world. The text discusses the two ropes. We have the rope of reason, Akıl, and the rope of the Quran.
Aliam run 103 again.
Right. But this raises a fundamental theological question, doesn't it? If reason is this greatest power, this seed planted by God that naturally smells poison and produces social blood, why do we need the Quran? If Akıl acts as a furqan, a discriminator between right and wrong, isn't revelation redundant? If I have a working compass, why do I need you to shout directions at me?
Because the compass tells you north, but it doesn't tell you the terrain. The text answers this with one of the most elegant metaphors I've ever read. The comb.
The comb analogy. Break that down for us.
Imagine human life, our social affairs, our economics, our families, as a head of hair. But it's not neat. It's a tangled, knotted mess. Chaos. Akıl, reason, is the comb. Its function is to pass through the strands and untangle the knots. It brings order to chaos. It separates the truth from the superstition.
Okay, reason is the tool of disentanglement.
But here is the catch. A comb can untangle hair, but who decides the style? You can untangle hair and leave it hanging in your face. You can untangle it and braid it. You can untangle it and shave it off. The text argues that revelation, the divine law, provides the style. It tells the comb how to shape the hair. Reason provides the capacity to order our lives, but the Quran provides the honor, the sharef of the design. Without the book, the comb might untangle the knots, but it might style society into a hierarchy of oppression or utilitarian nightmare.
I see. So reason is the hardware, revelation is the operating system?
Closer to, reason is the hand that builds, revelation is the blueprint. The text mentions rights, haklar here. It says reason is what allows us to recognize the concept of a right, parental rights, orphan rights, but it's the revelation that consecrates those rights. Bayrakli writes, reason paves the road to God through rights. When you recognize the right of a neighbor, you are actually engaging in a form of intellectual worship.
I found the section on rights to be the strongest bridge between the religious and secular views in the book. The idea that acknowledging someone's rights is a cognitive act, that you are thinking correctly when you are just, is compelling. But the text makes a massive leap there. It suggests that because reason recognizes the rights of an orphan, it therefore proves the specific theology of Islam. I would argue reason paves the road to justice. Whether that road continues on to God is a matter of faith, not deduction. I can recognize an orphan's rights because of empathy or social contract theory. I don't need the bond to the divine to be a decent person.
But the text would ask, where does that empathy come from? Is it just a chemical firing in your brain? If so, it can be overwritten by another chemical firing. Bayrakli argues that the concept of right, haq, is literally one of the names of God. You cannot separate the concept of justice from the ultimate judge. When Akıl identifies a right, it is identifying a fragment of the divine in the social fabric.
That's the no neutral ground argument again.
And the text doubles down on it with the concept of rushd. We talked about lub, the marrow, but rushd is the analyst. It means maturity or judgment. The text calls rushd the lab technician of society. It takes the blood sample, analyzes the crime, analyzes the economics, but ultimately it must report its findings to a higher authority. If rushd analyzes a problem but has no moral framework to solve it, it's just generating data. It's a scientist watching a lab rat die and taking notes. That isn't reason, that's observation. Reason acts.
Let's pivot to how this lack of action or wrong action is framed psychologically. We've talked about society, but the book has a very sharp focus on the individual mind, specifically the line between reason and madness. There is a fascinating, almost Freudian analysis of the Hujurat verses, the people shouting at the prophet from behind the walls.
The ode alarm metaphor. This is where the text connects intelligence, IQ, with manners, EQ.
Yes. The text interprets the act of shouting, being loud, rude, aggressive, not just as bad behavior, but as mindlessness. It says Akıl causes one to speak the truth, but it also implies Akıl causes one to speak quietly or respectfully. It links edeb, ethics, manners directly to cognitive health.
It's profound insight. Rudeness is a cognitive failure. Think about that. The text says those who shout from behind the walls represent a disconnect. They are physically close, but mentally distant. They are blocked by the wall of their own ego. Berkeley argues that true intelligence inherently possesses grace. If you are aggressive in your debate, if you are shouting down your opponent, you aren't displaying dominance, you are displaying a lack of Akıl. You are behind the wall.
I agree that civility is a sign of maturity. But the text goes further. It calls denial a black hole in the heart. It says just as a black hole in space devours light, the black hole of denial devours the light of reason. This is beautiful imagery, but we have to address the stigma here. By framing theological dissent as a black hole or a lack of manners, the author is pathologizing disagreement. It implies that you cannot have an honest, respectful, rational disagreement with the premise of the Quran. If I disagree, I am shouting from behind the wall. I am oppressing my own reason.
I think you're reading it as an attack, whereas the author presents it as a tragedy. The text isn't trying to insult the denier. It's trying to diagnose why they are suffering. Berkeley writes that reason does not let a person forget himself. It is the faculty of self-awareness. When the text says denial is mindlessness, it means that the denier has forgotten their own nature. They have forgotten the seed inside them. It's not an insult, it's a wake-up call.
But to the person who feels fully awake, who feels that their skepticism is a result of rigorous thought, being told they are in a black hole feels dismissive. It shuts down the conversation. It says you aren't thinking, you're just broken.
Maybe. Or maybe it offers a way out of the brokenness. Look at the metaphor of paying the blood money, diet.
This was one of the more obscure concepts for me. Connect it for the listeners.
In tribal law, if you killed someone, you paid blood money to prevent a cycle of violence. Berkeley applies this to the internal world. When we sin, or when we make a mistake, we cause a fracture. We spill spiritual blood. We create a feud between our soul and God. Akıl is the negotiator. Reason is the faculty that steps in and says, we must pay the price to restore peace. That price is repentance.
So repentance is a rational calculation.
Yes, that's the brilliance of it. It paints repentance not as emotional groveling, but as a strategic restorative act. It stops the feud. A rational person wants peace, so a rational person repents. It frames reason as a peacemaker.
I can appreciate that functional view of repentance. It's very pragmatic. But again, it presupposes the feud exists. I want to go back to the sieve analogy, which contradicts the comb in a way I found troubling. The text says reason is a sieve. It filters what we hear. It quotes the verse, those who listen to words and follow the best of them. This implies a critical faculty, a filter.
Yes, I call filters out the garbage.
But my argument is, if reason is truly a sieve, it must be allowed to filter everything, including religious claims. A true sieve doesn't have pre-cut holes that only let one specific theology through. But the book seems to say reason is a sieve, but it is manufactured to only let the truth of Islam pass through. That's not a sieve, that's a funnel. A funnel directs everything to one predetermined point. A sieve discriminates. I feel the text promises a sieve, but delivers a funnel.
That's a sharp distinction, but I'd argue that a funnel is exactly what you want if the goal is survival. The text talks about nuha, another term for reason, which implies forbidding or preventing. Reason forbids the ego from destroying itself. It forbids the society from eating the poisonous grass. Yes, it restricts, it channels, but it channels us away from suicide, spiritual or social. If your sieve lets through the poison because it wants to be open-minded, then your reason has failed its survival function. Berkeley's point is that open-mindedness without a bond to truth is just a hole in the head.
And that
Right there is the fundamental divide. The text views open-mindedness without faith as dangerous vulnerability. I view it as the prerequisite for finding truth. The poisonous grass analogy suggests that moral truths are as obvious as biological toxins, but they aren't. Human history is a 10,000-year debate about what is poisonous and what is nutritious. By defining Akıl as the faculty that automatically knows the difference, provided it connects to God, the text bypasses the hard work of actual ethical philosophy. It solves the problem by definition, not by demonstration.
And yet, look at the results of that 10,000-year debate. Look at the social leukemia around us, the breakdown of family, the commodification of humans, the existential dread. The text asks a simple, haunting question. Don't you use your Akıl? It asks us to look at the wreckage of a world that has tried to rely on dry logic or secular reason and ask, is it working? The advocate in me says that Bioakil is offering a diagnosis that matches the symptoms. The separation of the heart from the brain has been catastrophic. The text proposes tevhid, unity, unifying the nefs, the drives, the heart, the conscience, and the reason, the intellect.
I agree that the diagnosis of fragmentation is powerful. We do live in a fragmented world, and the call to unify our faculties, to not be just walking brains or walking appetites, is valuable. But I worry that the cure proposed is a form of intellectual surrender. To accept that Akıl is a bond to the divine is to accept that my mind is not my own, but a terminal connected to a mainframe I cannot question.
But if that mainframe is the source of all wisdom, all hikmet, which the text says is distilled knowledge, then connecting to it isn't surrender. It's an upgrade. It's reaching the full potential of the hardware.
And that is the question every listener has to answer for themselves. Is reason a tool we use to navigate the dark, or is it a spark of the light itself?
Precisely.
So to summarize, Allah's greatest creative power, AKIL forces us to rethink the very architecture of our minds. It offers a holistic, spiritually integrated view that promises to cure our social leukemia. But it does so by redefining reason to mean the capacity to believe. If one accepts the premise, the architecture is a fortress of peace. If one seeks an objective, neutral definition of intellect, it feels like a walled garden.
And I would conclude that the text successfully argues that neutrality is a myth. I mean, there is no neutral reason. There is only reason that connects or reason that decays. By defining Akıl as the force that unites the nefs, the heart, and the divine, Professor Bioakil presents reason as the ultimate savior of humanity, the insulator against evil, the comb for our tangled lives, and the marrow that keeps our social blood healthy.
It certainly challenges the reader to look inward.
It does. It forces us to ask if our own comb is actually untangling our life, or if we are just pulling out our hair.
And whether our spiritual marrow has dried up, leaving us with nothing but a hollow shell.
A powerful question to leave with. Thank you for joining the debate.